When I tell you that land holds memory, I mean it. Every tree on my father's old property feels like it still remembers him. I grew up believing that when a man works the soil with his own hands, the land becomes part of him. Maybe that's why losing it felt like losing him all over again. My Aunt Marlene never saw it that way. She always acted polite, always brought casseroles to family gatherings, always said she worried about me. But behind every soft smile was a calculation. I didn't know it then, but she'd been planning to take the land long before my father passed. Life was simple back then. I lived quietly, worked odd jobs, kept to myself, and took care of the little house that still smelled like pine and old books. I didn't have much, but what I had meant everything. I didn't know that Marlene had already decided it would all become hers. Before we go deeper, stay with me. What happened next turned my whole world upside down and nearly took everything my father left me. The day everything shifted felt ordinary at first. I woke up to the smell of damp soil after a night of rain, the kind of morning my father loved most. But when I stepped outside, I noticed something strange. Survey flags, fresh ones, planted right along my northern boundary. I didn't touch them at first. I just stared, trying to understand who would mark my land without speaking to me. My stomach tightened with a feeling I couldn't explain. 2 hours later, a county officer pulled into my driveway. I walked out to meet him, confused, wiping dirt off my hands from the garden. He didn't waste time. "Ethan Reynolds?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "You're under investigation for unauthorized land expansion and altering boundary markers." I laughed, not out of disrespect, just disbelief. "You must have the wrong property." "We have photos," he said. "We have witness statements." That cold rush hit me, the kind that starts in your spine and spreads through your whole body. Witness statements, photos, of what? He handed me a folder. Inside were pictures of boundary posts supposedly moved deeper into my Aunt Marlene's land. My hands shook. I had never touched a single post in my life. I looked up and saw her standing on her porch across the road, arms folded, expression soft, too soft, like she already knew how this would play out. Her eyes didn't show worry. They showed victory. That was the moment I knew something was wrong, deeply wrong. But I had no idea just how far she'd go, or how close I already was to losing everything. Things spiraled fast from there, and trust me, it gets worse before it gets better. The investigation moved faster than I could catch my breath. Within days, county officers placed official markers around the edges of what they now claimed was disputed territory. My land, my father's land, the only piece of him I had left, and I watched strangers hammer stakes into it like they were dividing up a piece of meat. Neighbors whispered when I walked by. A few asked quiet questions I couldn't answer. Most avoided eye contact. One even said, "Ethan, why'd you do it? You know messing with boundaries is a felony." I didn't blame them. The evidence against me looked airtight, almost too perfect. What I didn't know yet was that too perfect was the first clue. A week into the ordeal, I received a notice barring me from stepping onto the disputed section of my own property. The paper shook in my hand. I felt like a stranger in the place I grew up. And right on cue, my Aunt Marlene knocked on my door. She didn't wait for me to invite her in. She just stepped inside like she owned the place. Her perfume smelled like lilies, same as always, masking the rot beneath. "Oh, Ethan," she sighed, lowering herself into my father's old chair. "This is all such a shame. If only you'd been more careful." Careful, that word burned. "I didn't move any markers," I said quietly. "You know I didn't." She gave a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sometimes intent doesn't matter, dear. Things happen. But perhaps we can resolve this. Maybe you'd feel better selling the land before the case gets worse." There it was, the real motive, plain as daylight. I stared at her. "You think I'd sell you my father's land? After this?" She didn't blink. "I think you're in a very vulnerable position, and I'm offering you a way out." I felt something inside me crack. Not anger, not fear, but clarity. She wasn't just trying to take the land. She believed she'd already won. After she left, slamming the door with confidence she didn't bother hiding, I sat alone in the quiet house, trying not to drown in the weight of what she'd done. I almost lost hope. Almost. Until I remembered something. A memory so old it felt like it belonged to someone else. When I was 10, my father showed me a metal box. He said, "If anything ever happens to me, Ethan, you open this," but only then. He put it in the attic and never spoke of it again. I ran upstairs, dust swirling in the dim attic light. It took half an hour to find the box under old quilts and tool parts. The lock was rusted, but it didn't take much to break. Inside were papers, dozens of them, tax documents, maps, letters, and at the very bottom, wrapped in cloth and yellowed with age, a deed. Not a copy, not a scan. The original deed, signed 47 years ago by the man who sold my father the land. I unfolded it carefully, and that's when I saw it. The land boundaries, the measurements, the signature, the stamp, and the kicker, the part that nearly made me drop it. The northern border, the very border Marlene claimed I had crossed, had never been changed. The markers in the photos, they didn't match the ones listed in the original deed. Someone had moved them. Someone had forged statements. Someone had built a case around a boundary line that was provably intact for nearly half a century. Someone meaning her. I felt something unfamiliar rise in me. Not panic this time, but strength. Quiet, steady, burning strength. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, I had proof, real proof, the kind that could end her entire scheme. I didn't know it yet, but this discovery was about to turn everything upside down, for both of us. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the deed spread out in front of me like a lifeline. The paper was older than me, older than Marlene's schemes, older than every lie she stitched together to trap me. Every time I traced the boundary lines with my finger, I felt the same thing rising inside me. Certainty. For the first time since this nightmare started, I wasn't drowning. I was standing. Around sunrise, I made my first call. Not to a lawyer, not to the sheriff, not to anyone in the family. I called the only man my father ever trusted with legal matters, Mr. Whitaker, a retired land attorney who had practiced for 40 years before moving 2 towns over. I expected him to decline. I expected him to tell me he was done with this kind of thing. But when I mentioned my father's name, he went quiet. "Son," he said softly, "I've been waiting to hear your voice for a long time. Bring me everything." I drove to his small office above a hardware store. He opened the door before I knocked, white-haired, thin, but his eyes sharp as ever. When I laid the deed on his desk, he handled it like it was a relic. "This," he said, tapping the faded corner, "is not only valid, it's ironclad, and anyone trying to override it is either ignorant or criminally stupid." "Or both," I muttered. He nodded. "Tell me everything." I explained the false accusations, the boundary flags, the photos, the witness statements that didn't make sense. I told him about Marlene's visit, her soft voice masking her hunger, her push for me to sell before things got worse. When I finished, Whitaker leaned back in his chair. "She moved those markers," he said, "or hired someone to. Doesn't matter which. What matters is she's been building this plan for a long time. How do I stop her?" He tapped the deed again. "This stops her. But we can't just show up and wave it around. If she set you up this carefully, she'll fight dirty when cornered. We need to hit her in a way that leaves no room to breathe." He outlined a plan, simple but devastating. First, he contacted a licensed surveyor, a man with a reputation for being brutally honest. By noon, we were walking the land together. He examined every marker, studied the photos the county had taken, cross-checked everything against the original deed, and shook his head in disbelief. "These aren't just moved," he said. "They were re-anchored. Someone dug fresh holes." He knelt beside one of them and brushed away soil. "See that? The dirt's loose, not packed. This was done recently." "Can you put that in writing?" Whitaker asked. "I can put it in writing, photos, diagrams, and testimony if needed," the man replied. We were building a case brick by brick, but we weren't done. Next, Whitaker had me make a request for all documents filed with the county related to the dispute. We spent hours going through them. That was when I found it, a statement supposedly signed by a neighbor claiming he saw me tampering with markers. Except the signature didn't match his real one. I'd seen his signature dozens of times. He signed everything with a swooping loop at the end. This one was stiff, straight, forged. Whitaker whistled. Marlene didn't even bother trying to disguise it well. Her arrogance will help us. We kept digging, and as the evidence stacked up, something strange began happening inside me. I expected anger, rage, vindication, but what I felt was steadiness. My father used to say that truth doesn't shout, it stands. That day, his words stuck to me like armor. By late afternoon, Whitaker drafted a formal statement that would trigger a county review hearing within 48 hours. A hearing Marlene thought she would walk through effortlessly. A hearing where she planned to watch me lose everything. But this time, we'd have the deed, the surveyor, the forged signature analysis, the photographs showing fresh soil, the measurements proving every accusation false. And I had one more thing Marlene didn't expect: courage. That night I sat on the porch of the old house listening to crickets and the rustle of wind through the trees. I remembered sitting here with my father as a kid, swinging my feet, asking why he trusted land more than people. He'd said, "Land doesn't lie, son. It doesn't change its story depending on who's listening. But people do." The next morning I avoided Marlene completely. She tried to wave at me from her porch, smiling like nothing was wrong. A fox smiling at a henhouse. I didn't wave back. I didn't even slow down. I had places to be. Whitaker met me outside the county building. He straightened my collar like a father would and said, "Let her talk first. The more rope she takes, the harder the fall." Inside, the hearing room was crowded. Neighbors, officials, curious family members who had believed her lies. Marlene walked in wearing pearls and confidence, carrying a folder so thick you'd think she was prosecuting a murder trial. She sat across from me and gave me a sympathetic smile. "Oh, sweetheart, I hope we can resolve this peacefully." Peaceful was never her intention. But justice was mine. When the hearing began, she spoke first, just as Whitaker predicted. She painted herself as a victim, described me as careless and irresponsible, waved photos and statements like trophies. Some people nodded along, some shook their heads, and I watched her spin the same web she thought she'd catch me in. But then it was our turn. Whitaker didn't start with accusations. He started with the deed. The room went silent when he laid it on the table. A 47-year-old document. Original ink, original signatures, authentic boundary markings. Then he introduced the surveyor. Then the forged signature comparison. Then the soil analysis. Then the evidence that the markers had been moved only weeks ago by someone who wasn't me. By the time he finished, Marlene's face was drained of color. Her hands shook. She opened her mouth to object, but nothing came out. And the hearing officer said the words she never expected to hear. "Mrs. Fletcher, based on this evidence, it appears you initiated a fraudulent claim." Everything she planned collapsed in seconds. When it was over, she wouldn't meet my eyes. Not once. But I met hers. Because after everything she'd done to me, she needed to see the one thing she never thought she would. Me standing. I woke up the next morning with a strange kind of calm inside me. The kind you feel after a storm tears the roof off your house, but somehow leaves you standing. I was still Ethan, still the nephew who had been framed, humiliated, dragged through the mud by the one woman who used to braid my mother's hair and swear she'd look after her sister's only child. But I was no longer the man being hunted. I was the man holding the truth. And the truth was heavy. The original deed, the signatures from 47 years ago, the notarized seal, and the letter my grandfather tucked in the envelope. Everything had shifted the world overnight. I expected the town to settle into silence, but they didn't. News spread fast in small places like Willow Bend. By noon, people were no longer whispering. They were pointing, talking, piecing together every odd behavior Marlene ever showed, every moment she tried too hard to smile, every land dispute she pretended wasn't personal. I walked into Miller's Diner for breakfast just to see the day for myself. Conversations stopped the moment I stepped inside. Not in judgment, in apology, in realization. One of the farmers, old George Travers, stood first. "Ethan, son, we had no right to believe any of that mess." I nodded. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I wasn't going to waste breath on bitterness either. I just said, "It's over now," or close to it. But it wasn't over. Not even close. By the time the sheriff called me in that afternoon, I already sensed something was off. The deputy kept glancing toward the back room, where the sheriff usually handled delicate matters. When they finally brought me in, Sheriff Daly looked tired, like he'd aged 10 years since the night he put me in handcuffs. "She wants to talk to you," he said. My stomach tightened. "Marlene?" He nodded. "Her lawyer says she insisted. Says she won't speak to anyone else until she speaks to you." I wasn't sure whether I wanted to hear her voice again, but part of me needed closure, needed to understand how a woman who once knitted me a blanket when I turned 5 could turn into someone who tried to erase my life. They led me down the hall to the holding room. The moment I stepped inside, I saw her sitting at the metal table, hair messy, eyes red, hands shaking. She'd aged overnight, too. She looked up, and for the first time, she didn't have that coldness, that rehearsed superiority. She looked human, flawed, scared. "Ethan," she whispered, "I didn't want it to go this far." "You framed me," I said softly. "It doesn't get further than that." Her lip trembled. "I know, but you don't understand." I leaned back. "Then make me." She swallowed hard, eyes darting to the corners like she expected someone else to burst in. "I didn't plan to blame you. I planned to negotiate with you. But then someone else got involved. Someone who wanted the land more than I did." I frowned. "Who?" She hesitated. Tears pooled. "Your uncle, my husband, Carl." That stunned me. Carl was quiet, distant, more likely to sit on a porch and ignore the world than mastermind anything. "Carl? Why would he care?" Her voice cracked. "Because he borrowed money. A lot of it. More than the farm could ever repay. And the people he borrowed from, they wanted collateral. They wanted your land. When he told them he couldn't hand over something that wasn't legally his, they told him to fix it or they'd take the farm, and everything else." My heartbeat thudded in my ears. The betrayal suddenly had layers, old roots, sharp thorns hidden under the surface. Marlene continued, hands gripping the table. "It was supposed to be simple. Discredit you, make the town doubt you, get you desperate enough to sell. We never expected the sheriff to act so fast, to press charges before we could talk you down." I stared at her. Every word stung. Every syllable felt like a needle dragging across old wounds. "So you let me sit in a cell," I said, voice low. "You let the whole town shame me." She broke. I know, and I swear, Ethan, it wasn't supposed to ruin you. It was supposed to push you." I shook my head slowly. "You pushed me toward a grave, not a negotiation." She dropped her face into her hands. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." For a moment I almost believed her remorse. Almost. But remorse doesn't unburn a house or unbreak a life. It doesn't clean the mud off a reputation thrown under wagon wheels. "What happens now?" I finally asked. She looked up, eyes hollow. "They're coming after Carl. When they realize the land is legally yours, they'll come after him harder, and they'll come after me. I don't know what to do." Something inside me hardened. That's not my problem anymore. Her expression collapsed further. "Please, Ethan, please don't let them take everything. There's more at stake than you know." I stood. "Everything I needed to know I learned the night you let them lock me up." The sheriff appeared in the doorway, as if he'd been listening the whole time. "That's enough," he said gently. I walked out without looking back. But her words followed me down the hall like shadows stretching at sunset. Someone else wanted the land. Someone dangerous. Someone willing to ruin me to get it. And now that the truth was out, they weren't going to stay quiet. They were going to come. And the land my grandfather left me, the land that held the memories of every generation before us, had just become the battlefield for something bigger, darker, and far from over. I stepped out into the cool evening air, the sun dropping behind the ridge. For the first time I understood. Winning back my name wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. I didn't sleep the night after talking to Marlene. I lay awake listening to every creak, every shift of the wind outside my window, every distant sound of a truck on the county road. I kept replaying her words in my mind, those trembling whispers about the men Carl owed money to. Men who didn't negotiate, didn't forgive, didn't forget. If they wanted the land badly enough to push my aunt into framing me, then they weren't going to disappear just because the sheriff cleared my name. They were going to come, and I needed to be ready. By morning the sky was gray and heavy, like the world itself hadn't decided whether to rain or break apart. I drove straight to the old farmhouse my grandfather left me, the land at the center of this entire storm. I hadn't been here since the night Marlene set me up. It still smelled the same. Wood, soil, early dew, memories that lived in the walls like ghosts that refused to leave. I walked the perimeter slowly, taking it all in. The barn needed repairs. The fencing on the west side had gaps wide enough for coyotes. The fields were dry, but the land itself, the land was still alive. Still mine. Still worth protecting. I wasn't leaving again. As I stepped onto the front porch, a black truck rumbled up the gravel drive. My chest tightened. I didn't recognize it. The engine idled low and angry. The driver stepped out, tall, broad shoulders, heavy jacket, hard eyes. Then another man got out on the passenger side, thinner but sharper, like a knife someone forgot to put back in the drawer. "Ethan Reynolds?" the larger one asked. I didn't move. "Depends who's asking." The thinner one smiled in a way that felt cold. "We're friends of Carl." I felt the weight of those words immediately. "Carl's problems aren't mine." "That's where you're wrong," the big one said. "Carl offered this land as collateral, and now that we know it's yours, well, you're part of the problem." I kept my voice steady. The land was never his, and now the court documents prove it. The thin man stepped closer. "Documents burn, people disappear, debts stay." My jaw clenched. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to intimidate, maybe worse. But fear wasn't going to save me, and running wasn't an option, not anymore. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. "You can try whatever you want, but the sheriff knows you're involved. The town knows what Marlene did. And now the entire county is watching this land. You make a move, and you'll be the ones disappearing." The thinner man studied me carefully, eyes narrowing. "You're braver than Carl." "No," I said, just done being pushed around. For a moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the wind scraping through the dried grass behind the barn. Then the bigger man exhaled, a slow, irritated breath. "This isn't finished," he growled. They turned and got back into their truck, gravel spraying as they drove off. I watched until the dust settled, but I knew it wasn't over. Men like that didn't back down. They regrouped. I needed help, so I drove straight to Sheriff Daly's office. He listened carefully, jaw tightening as I told him everything. When I mentioned the men's names, the ones Marlene had whispered through tears, the sheriff nodded grimly. "I know them," he said. "Loan sharks. Run half their business through a salvage yard out on Route 12. Dangerous enough. Stupid enough to push their luck." "Can you stop them?" I asked. "Maybe, but they don't scare easy." "I'm not scared anymore," I said. "I just want this over." He nodded. "Then we do this the right way. You stay on your land. Keep your head down. I'll put a patrol through your area for the next few nights." It wasn't perfect, but it was something. I went home, grabbed supplies, and moved into the old farmhouse that same afternoon. The place wasn't ready for living. No running water, barely functioning electricity. But that didn't matter. I wasn't there for comfort. I was there to stand my ground. When night came, I built a fire in the old stone fireplace and sat by it, listening to the crackle and pop. The house felt alive again, like it recognized me, like it knew I had finally returned for good. Around midnight, the crunch of gravel outside broke the silence. My heart jumped, but I stayed still. Then came voices, low, frustrated, irritated. Flashlights skimmed past the windows. Boots scraped along the side of the house. I moved quietly, staying close to the floor, watching shadows stretch across the living room walls. Then nothing, silence. I waited. A minute, 2, 5, then a loud series of knocks. Not on the front door, on the barn door. They were checking every structure, every opening, every weakness. But the sheriff's patrol car rolled up moments later, lights off but presence clear. The intruders scattered into the trees, their shadows flickering away like smoke in the wind. Sheriff Daly stepped out quietly. "You all right?" "Yeah," I said, breath shaky but steadying. "I'm not going anywhere." He nodded. "They'll try again, but now we have enough to act." The next morning, warrants went out. The men were arrested at their salvage yard, caught with evidence tying them to threats, extortion, and illegal loan operations. Carl became a cooperating witness. Marlene, facing her own charges, begged the judge for leniency. But I didn't speak against her. I didn't speak for her either. I just told the truth. In the end, justice didn't come loudly. It came quietly, in paperwork, in signatures, in the same kind of ink that once protected this land 47 years ago. When the dust finally settled, I stood again on my porch, looking over the fields. They weren't just acres of dirt. They were my inheritance, my legacy, my name. And no one, not family, not strangers, not men with debts or guns, was ever going to take them from me again. This land waited for me, and now I was staying.